In this video, I'm going to show you how to stain wood. Before you're ready to stain, you got to make sure all the holes that you have are pre-drilled and then your piece is already sanded and well cleaned off. If you drill any holes or make any cuts after you've already stained it, it'll have this natural wood finish again and it will not match the rest, so it'll stick out like a sore thumb. So it's very important you get the wood prepped and ready to install or assemble prior to getting everything stained. Once everything is ready, the first thing you're going to do is clean off the entire board. So what we're going to be doing today is we have some paint thinner and then we're just going to use an old rag and we're going to wipe everything clean, and then after it's dry, we're ready to stain. I'm not going to show the process of wiping this down because it's as simple as putting the paint thinner on a rag and wiping over everything. If you are using paint thinner or acetone to clean everything off, or if you're opening the stain and you're not in a well ventilated area, I really recommend you do get a ventilator like this. I also recommend you get some rubber gloves, and that'll help keep a lot of the chemicals off your hand. All my wood is drilled, cut, and prepped, so I'm going to wipe it all down now, and I'll continue once all the paint thinner is dried off of it. Now all the wood I'm going to be staining is cleaned off, and as you can tell, it's got a slightly darker hue than it did before. That's because it's still a little bit wet. So I am going to get it dried out a little bit more before I get started, but I wanted to describe the technique before I did this because I can't really be heard with the respirator on while I'm doing this. First thing you're going to do is take your actual stain and you're going to shake it as well as you can for a few minutes, and then you should still use a stirring rod of some sort and try to scrape everything off the bottom. Basically, the pigment that gives the stain its color tends to settle and it all collects on the bottom. So what happens is if you're stirring something around with the stirring rod and you feel that thick, like a sludge almost built up on the bottom of it, it'll give a little resistance on the end of the rod when you're stirring. That means you're not stirred well enough yet and you have to keep going. Then when you are fully mixed and all your wood's dry enough to begin staining, what you want to do is take a rag, either one that you've used previously to stain with the same color or a new fresh white rag. You can use something like this where it's an old cut up t-shirt, you can use an old towel, it doesn't really matter, but you do want to make sure if at all possible it has no color or stain in it. If there's any color or patterns on the actual rag, there's a slight chance some of the ink could come out of that and then soak in with the stain. Now it's not super likely that'll happen, and it's not necessarily guaranteed that even if it did happen you would see that color through the stain. It's more likely to show up on those lighter colors. So now you have your clean wood, you have your well mixed stain, and you have your white rag. When this is open, you want to start by dipping in just a bit of this rag, and you don't want it soaking wet, but you want it damp. And what you're going to do is rub it into the whole area along the entire length of the board until it starts getting the full color. And then you're going to take a fresh rag or a clean part of your current rag, and you're going to wipe one end all the way down to the other in one smooth fluid motion, and that will give you a single line that goes the whole way across. It's kind of like when you're painting, you want to go from one end all the way to the other at the end as a final pass. Otherwise you have these small acute strokes in the middle, or you might see the swirls back and forth like this if that's how you were applying the stain to initially rub it in. By going one end all the way to the other, you get that one continuous run and you're not having any weird acute lines in the middle. As I already said, the first thing you want to do when opening the can of stain is to scrape everything off the bottom and thoroughly mix this, as you're seeing me do here. After that, you're ready to wet the rag with the stain, and remember, you want it to be damp but not absolutely dripping. Try to avoid having any puddles of stain that build up for any prolonged period of time, but other than that, you're just working the stain into the wood from one end to the other and trying to get a nice even coat over the entire board. The two most likely places for puddling to occur are one, when you first apply the rag, when you have more stain built up on the rag, you can get some puddling by the initial area, and then two, as you're seeing here, I have a little bit of an excess puddle that dripped over from the top surface onto the surface that's nearest the camera. Anytime you're working near an edge, it's very easy to get a little extra that kind of runs over the edge onto the next surface, and that's a big area you gotta watch out for. At a minimum, you'll want to hit any surface with stain that will be visible on the final product that you're building or assembling. So for me, I don't really have to hit the back side of this board because that'll be flush against a wall in this application. So you'll notice that I don't really hit the back side at all with the stain. Finish off the board by taking the clean and preferably white rag and wiping it from one end to the other in a smooth continuous motion. This will make sure you don't have any extra streaks that showed up from your application pattern. Personally, I like to start by working the edges of the board and then moving towards the center. Kind of like how when you're applying, it's very easy to get excess stain to flow over and create a puddle on a different side. It's the same way when you're doing the flow application at the end. When you're trying to get that smooth line, you can also make a very visible line right at the edge of the board if you're not careful about how you wipe between the corner of two surfaces. When you're arranging the wood and the stain to dry, try to make sure that the finished surface, kind of like a painted finished surface, isn't propped up against anything. If the stained surface is in contact with anything while it's drying, there's a chance that that surface can have some of the stain absorb out of the wood and into it, and otherwise it could also rub a strange pattern into the stain, which is kind of what we were trying to avoid by doing those end-to-end passes. They can give you these weird imperfections and surface finish defects that'll become very noticeable after it's been dried. The final thing I want to note about how I'm laying these out to dry is the first piece I do, I'm putting it as far back as possible. Then I'm laying everything up, starting from the back to the front. The reason you do this is because if you have your first pieces farther forward and then you go to lay things out behind them after, there's a likelihood that you could potentially drip stain, or if you're painting, paint onto those front pieces as you pass things over the top. And by not passing more things over them, you're eliminating the possibility of this happening. That is how you stain wood. One last thing I want to point out before closing out this video is that if you put more coats on, it will give you a darker finish, and also different types of wood absorb it at different rates. For example, this is just some standard pine. These are some oak dowels for a closet rod. These are a much darker appearance right off the bat. And these just say wood closet pole sockets. They don't even have a type of wood specified, but because these are end grains here, they do soak in a lot more. You also see that on the end grains here for these boards. The end grain just soaks in a lot more because it's got a lot more basically exposed veins. But anyway, that's all there is to it. So thank you for watching, and I hope this helped you out.